Good evening. Thank you so much for being here on such a celebratory occasion. I'm Michelle White. I'm the senior curator here at the Menil. And I'm really happy you're here and pleased to welcome Reem Fadda, who is this year's 2017 Walter Hopps Award E for Curatorial Achievement. Congratulations. So this award was established in 2001, and it was established in honor of the Menil's founding director, Walter Hopps. It recognizes mid-career curators who have made significant contributions to the field of contemporary art through the organization of exhibitions, through publications, projects with artists, or even the building of a collection. Former recipients of the biennial award have included Roger Bruegel, Hamza Walker, Unji Ju, Maria Lind, Adam Shimshik, Kwekak Medina, and Thomas Lax. So to select this year's award, we assembled a really illustrious panel. The awardee this year was chosen by Feng Boi of the Brooklyn Rail, Hao Hanru, the artistic director of Maxi in Rome, and Jessica Morgan, the director of the Dia Art Foundation in New York. Together, they conferred the 8th award to Reem Fadda in recognition of her work organizing innovative exhibitions of contemporary art from the Middle East and Africa, her achievements as an institution builder, and her scholarly contributions as a writer and speaker on contemporary art. To tell you more about her biography, Reem is an independent curator based in Ramallah. She is the curator of Jerusalem Lives, which just ended. It was the inaugural exhibition at the new Palestinian Museum. From 2010 to 2016, she was the associate curator of Middle Eastern art for the Guggenheim's Abu Dhabi project, building the museum's collection and defining the vision for the new institution. From 2005 to 2007, she directed the Palestinian Association for Contemporary Art and was academic director of the International Academy of Art in Palestine, which she helped found in 2006. She curated the Marrakesh Biennale 6 in 2016 and curated an exhibition that was a part of the Sharjah Biennale in Beirut in 2017. She has curated and been involved in numerous international exhibitions, including Liminal Spaces, a 4-year artistic and political project consisting of conferences, tours, art residencies, and exhibitions in Palestine, Israel, and Germany. Called Ramallah, this is a different project, Ramallah Syndrome, which was another project, and that was a part of the Venice Biennale in 2009. She also curated at the Venice Biennale in 2013, the UAE Pavilion, to much critical acclaim, and one of my standout projects that year. She also was a part of Tarjama Translation, organized by Arte East, featuring 30 artists from the Middle East and Central Asia at the Queen's Museum of Art, New York, and the Museum of Art at Cornell University. In 2009, she also curated the Riwak Biennale in Ramallah with Charles Esche. Reem, thank you so much for being here. We're so pleased, and congratulations for being the 2017 awardee of this important prize.
I'm gonna take off my shoes and then we're gonna start because I mistakenly thought that wearing heels was a good idea. It was not. So I didn't just grow shorter. I'm gonna try to walk you through some of the core ideas that has informed my practice, both theoretically and artistically and intuitively. And all the kind of research that has informed me as a curator and as a person working in this field in the past, at least, I would say 10 years and more. I'm gonna walk hopefully through 3 of the major projects that I've worked on in the past 10 years, starting with the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi and building that collection, and then going through the exhibition that I did for the Marrakesh Biennial in 2016, and I'm hoping that we will have enough time to even just skim through the last exhibition I did at the Palestinian Museum entitled Jerusalem Lives. And I hope through going through all these 3 projects, you'll be able to have an understanding about my practice and how I've kind of informed that practice and if I deserve that award or not, based on all that. So we're gonna start with, before I speak to the images and the works that we have here, I would like to just give you a little bit of a background of some of the ideas that have informed my practice, but I'm just gonna go just like that at the beginning. I wanna say that I started working at the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi project in 2010, and before that, I was a student at Cornell University doing my PhD in history of art of the region. And that's something that is, I want to say it's a real challenge, especially in the US, to look at the region, meaning the Middle East and North Africa and West, or what I prefer to call West Asia, North Africa, and South Asia. And looking at that area, or what we can also reference as the Global South, how that has informed art history today. The challenge with the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi project was, here I was being invited into an institution that pretty much, you can say the Guggenheim Foundation had close to 0 knowledge about the region, has barely not even 1% of its collection in New York with holdings from that region. And I was supposed to be the sole proprietor that's gonna tell them what that region and how it's going to be represented for its collection in a museum that's going to be built for the very first time on international standards in Abu Dhabi, in the Arab world, in a region that from New Delhi up to Morocco has no museum of that magnitude. Let me tell you, I was dumbfounded. I had to wake up from the sole kind of responsibility of being the one to draw that narrative, and colossal money. I mean, this is funding and the charge of the Abu Dhabi government, which is a very affluent government and is really willing to go a long way to make this happen. And this is a real challenge because there's nothing. It's not that there's nothing. There's no narrative that's set. There's no 1,000 books on Gerhard Richter of the Middle East, for example. There's very few that have charted this, and certainly no proper institutional framework that has built this inside the Middle East to a point of rigor where it could converse with an international language. And my colleagues were very keen. They come from an established language of American art, European art, even Latin American art. And they were very keen on having an informed language that would be equal to that. And so that's the defining, I would say, and weighted responsibility that was thrown into my face with I want to say, some of the best curators you would know, and they're all equally wonderfully vicious and can, really challenge you on every step. I really wanted to present the most solid of arguments. And my proposition and this kind of theoretical claim started with asking myself, what is modernity? Going back to the 20th century early on, what is modernity and how do we set the course to define what is modern and what is contemporary? What do we know? How can we shake the very foundations of what we know and then build something new? Because the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi is not going to be like any other museum. Certainly not the ones that you know in the US. Certainly not the same narratives. And we can start from scratch because we have a lot to compare with. So this is the founding kind of start that I wanted to kind of provoke. And one of the kind of key arguments that I found myself after a lot of studying on ideas like Benjaminian ideas, the Frankfurt School, Walter Benjamin is a big kind of source of my knowledge. And the thing that he's honed a lot is this idea of materiality in the foundation of modernity. So what we know of modernity in the West is based on materiality. The more you accumulate, the bigger the buildings, the more wealth you have, the more modern you are defined to be. And that's a real, I mean, I'm reducing it here, but this is the real kind of, this is the crux of what modernity really stands on in the understanding in the West. So here I am coming from a post-colonial, actually still colonial, I am Palestinian and we are still considered colonized. And I'm coming from the logic of no independence and a society that I find extremely vibrant and with a legacy in the Arab world of post-colonialism. We certainly don't have the big streets and roads to claim. We do not have the skyscrapers, maybe a little in Dubai now. But this is not the mindset of the Middle East. But there's also a lot that's there. And what is there is a legacy of what I consider this idea of decolonization and post-colonial legacy, which has been an incredible wealth, a different kind of wealth, an intangible wealth, an intangible wealth that is equally important in the definition of modernity, and no less a contributor to the making of culture. And I think that is a very interesting proposition to work with in defining what becomes modern and therefore contemporary. I'm not the first one to say this, but this is, what would that look like if you are making a collection? What would that look like if you are making the narrative of exhibitions? And that's something I wanted to go a long way with, to see how much we can develop that and really kind of unfold it. And if we do, I even go a little further, and I want to say that what we know as of today, even in the West, in the middle of Houston or New York, and I spoke today with wonderful artists that talked to me about their practice from all over the world, really. And there's an informed contemporary practice that is very sociopolitical. And this is something that we can't shy away of today. And that is contemporary art practice. And what I go even further to say is that that legacy of a developed contemporary art practice that is politically and societally aware comes because of a debt towards the third nations and to the global south. This is not the debt that came from the knowledge that was built from formalism. That was very much the Western legacy. Formalism is extremely important even to the East and even to the global South. And a lot of artists worked with a formal inquiry in mind. Of course, many of them had studied in Paris or New York or elsewhere, and formalism was a key component. But there was always an interjection of politics and society and an impulse to say, how do we do social betterment? Formalism is not enough. The frame of the painting has to have content, a driven content that talks about something more for society. And that, for me, was absolutely kind of the moment of inspiration in trying to develop a much more, let's say, wider framework of art that becomes more inclusive and becomes actually much more in dialogue. And this is not to say that artists in New York or LA did not have the same impulses, because they did. And that becomes the framework of an interesting transnational dialogue. When you look at a collection and you're building it on these frameworks, there's something that becomes interesting there. I'm gonna walk through very quickly some of just one chapter in the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi collection and talk about some of the key ideas. We really started to debate what was that moment that we can look at that kind of coming together in history. And the 60s is that kind of pivotal moment because there's also the student movement worldwide that's happening. There's a lot of decolonization movements in the 50s that kind of culminate in the 60s in the Arab world as well. So this is a very important and key time for a larger region. And we really wanted to feature the Middle East, and this is where we reference the Arab world as West Asia, and it became a major focus of the collection, and is varied in terms of everything that is inclusive from the museum onwards. I'm just going to present to you one kind of snippet of a chapter that we looked into and show you how we were trying to bring in some of these artists together that kind of marry in different ways on a formal plane, but how we started to look at various art schools that are defined in the region and present them in these kind of combined chapters of the collection. In this one in particular, it's called System Process Concept, and we really looked at highlighting movements of conceptual art practice. And in this particular chapter, we looked at a conceptual art practice that was taking place from the late 70s onwards that was actually in the UAE. Unknown to a lot of people, there was a very vibrant community of artists like Hassan Sharif, Muhammad Qasim, Abdullah Sultan, Muhammad Ahmed Ibrahim, that were a community of artists working in oblivion with barely zero public or governmental support. They drank alcohol. They fought with the traditionalists that were more prone to painting. They talked about performance art in the desert. They performed art in the desert. They did the most kind of interesting phenomenological practices of art. And they really presented something that was for their own sake, for their own sanity, but questioned particularly where they stood as citizens in the middle of a UAE that they could see with their own eyes as being transformed beyond human scale. And they were asking about their humanity amidst all of that kind of hubris of development and largesse of a modernity that they don't feel the affiliation to. So where is that idea of the modern man? Or where is matter of man in the middle of all of this kind of development? So I think that was nature became a very key component here that they were looking into. The man-made, the touch, the body. These were kind of key concepts that we found being introduced here in a very, I want to say, informed political manner. And we wanted to present that next to other kind of greats from the world of conceptual art, like the Group Zero from Germany, for example, who also were not that well known at the time and are getting more presentation in collections in the past 10 years. And Arte Povera and other of such groups that were presented as kind of these languages of collectives that were speaking to one another, and even in various times. So this is Hassan Sharif with an example of how he performs art works. These are documentations of his performances that he did in the desert. The Guggenheim Abu Dhabi has thankfully collected more than 63 works of Hassan Sharif before he passed away a few years ago. And these are some of his fabulous objects that he created. And Hassan was a proponent of this idea of material accumulation. He would collect materiality. Another very important kind of logic that also informed my practice from looking at the works of various artists like Hassan Sharif was this idea of what does it mean recycling as a political gesture in of itself, of the making of art. And I think that's something that has stuck with me for a long time. I see artwork like Arte Povera from third world nations that is about a gesture of recycling, ephemerality. What does it mean not to conserve the object? I think that these are kind of some of the most pertinent questions that kind of haunt me as well. What happens when, lives are, people are dying, and we still are talking about the conservation of an object? I think there's a lot that is amiss here in the logics of preservation, museology. Where are we going with our institutions to even push the boundaries of what we understand art practice to be and how far it can go in the engagement with societies? Hassan was certainly a person who, in his own mind, in his own studio, with his own group of younger artists, was really teaching them about the necessity of looking responsibly at matter that is surrounding them. And the vibrancy of that materiality really informed who he was. And he would just make these objects together. And he did not call them sculptures, he called them objects, because he referenced them as objects speaking to him. So this was something that was very key to Hassan. Muhammad Qasim is the artist that was his direct protege. He met him when he was 14. And Muhammad quit school to be under Hassan's mentorship and remained so until his dying days. There was not a day where they had not spoken or had not met and not drank together, and really talked about what was some of the core ideas. Existentialism, for example, is very big in Muhammad Qasim's work. I just want to reference this particular project that you see on your right, which is Muhammad worked on projects for multiple years. For example, he's been investigating this idea of directions for, I think now, at least 10 or 15 years, at least. And what is directions? Directions here is an encounter that happened for Muhammad Qasim in a time he was going out with his friends on a boat at night, drinking, and he unfortunately fell off the boat in the middle of the night. And after falling off the boat in the middle of the ocean, like the Gulf Sea, between like the UAE and Oman, and the boat took off without the guys realizing that he fell off the boat. And he was left there in the sea for nearly 30 minutes. His friends were able to chart their way back using the GPS that's in the boat to come back and find him and then save him, basically. And that's haunted him. This idea of traversing borders, kind of going through nature and obstacles through the use of these directions or the use of the GPS. And he started to use it symbolically as an anchoring or survival mechanism. And then he started doing all these kind of symbolic gestures of trying to cross the borders of nature and places, to talk about his oneness with nature or even the unknown. What you see on is that the right side, is Muhammad Qasim in 2002 going with Hassan Sharif on a boat and inscribing the directions of land, like the GPS coordinates of land and time of the UAE coast, which was Fujairah at the time, and throwing them these planks of wood that have that inscription in the middle of the water and just allowing them to kind of roam free. As if they were stand-ins for himself and where he stood. And I think it was like a very poetic gesture of survivalism, of existentialism, of going beyond, crossing borders. And then he dreamed of doing a room that would have a projection of the sea in 360 degrees with these coordinates lit on the floor, and a person could stand in and experience what it meant to be lost in the sea. And that was the project that I did with Muhammad Qasim for the Venice Biennial in 2013. We recreated that room that he had done this maquette of in 2005, and we finally recreated a room that had the projection of 360 degrees of this water. And actually what we didn't realize only until we made this room happen is when you stood in the middle, you started to feel vertigo. And you felt this kind of unease. And that was a very kind of successful project. And this also became part of the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi's collection. We collected both projects for Muhammad Qasim. Abdullah Sadi is another of the tutors, another of the students that were tutored on the hands of Hassan Sharif, and he really was inspired by nature. He talks about the sweet potato and the shape, the molded shape of a sweet potato that looks like a body, anthropomorphic, and he's created a language based on the sweet potato. He's created drawings based on the sweet potato. He's created sculptures with stone, with mud, with various things. He references how he was born outside in a farm, and that he's part of earth, and everything that is culled from the earth somehow speaks to him, and he feels that he's responsive to that. He's a very quaint and quiet personality that just draws and writes in a diary all day long. And this project that he's done with the sweet potato, he's also spent over a decade working on it in various forms and shapes. And the entire body of the work was bought by the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi. I have to say that what is really remarkable about the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi is that they've been able to acquire bodies of work or spanning a big period of time in an artist's career. And that is something that is a large investment, is quite key in how that narrative starts to tell the story. We've bought Gabriel Orozco's stone, and I think on a formal level and in a formal plane that speaks also quite remarkably beautiful to Abdullah Sadi's bodies of work. I'm just giving examples here. This is not in any ways comprehensive, but I just want to show you some of the ideas of how we're building narratives of various art schools and practitioners based on form and matter, and also content to tell a varied story. This is Heinz Mack from the Zero Group alongside Günter Uecker, and we have here Francis Morellet, Sol LeWitt, Mario Mertz, Cengiz Çekel from Istanbul as well. And Cengiz was a very important figure in, I would consider, the arte povera of the Global South, and particularly working from Istanbul in the 60s and 70s. Khalil Rabah, who is a contemporary artist from Palestine and works with this idea of the framework of deconstructing the institution based from ideas of body and nature. And it's a very kind of political gesture that he does. This is a hypothetical project which is called the Palestinian Museum of Natural History and Humankind. And this is a box that is very familiar to museums, which is, you know, the usual shipping containers, but in it he's created a glass vitrine with basically standing olive trees, and they are referencing the body and carcasses of human beings. Rashid Qureshi Rashid Qureshi is a very important figure from Algeria, who, unknown to a lot of people, it works a lot with crafts. And for him, that investigation in craft is very essential because he goes all across the Mediterranean and into Southern Europe to investigate a language of what he considered a historical language of a combined search in arts and crafts that unites an entire region. So the political gesture of bringing in these craftspeople to look into Sufist concepts, ideas of oneness with nature, with God, with humanity, is something for him that makes up his installations at large. Celebrated artist, and we also bought this amazing work called Path of Roses that he had spent more than 10 years working on. These are just renderings the spaces that would look like, because the museum is not yet built. So I'm still talking about a hypothetical, I mean, this is a built collection, but it's still, the actual building does not exist and it's unhoused as of yet. But this is just to show some of the more contemporary works alongside what the viewers would see. So this is the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, and really kind of looking into the ideas of, sorry, let's go there. I'm just gonna open that. Oh, here it is. I started to work on the Marrakesh biennial a few years after working with the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, and this was kind of a big break for me to work on an exhibition of a large scale in a place that was quite familiar to me, but I've never been to Morocco before that. And bringing in a lot of the weighted ideas that I had dealt with in an office and not being able to do an exhibition for 6 years, an extremely frustrated curator, as you can imagine, and suddenly unleashed on the world in Morocco. I mean, it was a big break for me on many levels. And I could explore this idea that in Morocco, there's not a single museum where I can actually show the work in Marrakesh. Perfect. I mean, a museum in the traditional white walls. I was like, wow, perfect for me. You know, like, I never wanted the white walls to begin with. And another thing that was a very important moment in thinking about, we talked about materiality and modernity and the idea of accumulation of matter, and that's still stuck with me coming to do this exhibition. But then there's the issue of time. I'm in Morocco, no more New York, where people are speeding in the light of, I don't know, above the speed of light on a daily, day-to-day basis, and you really are not aware of your time. You don't own your time in New York. And that concept, when I realized I could do everything in a couple of hours in Morocco. I'm the sole proprietor of my time. And I didn't even need money to do that. That was like, I own the world. If you own time, you own the world. And that for me was a revelation in of itself. What does it mean to become the owners of your own time? And if you think about this on again a theoretical plane, you find that our lives are kind of cut in various places. They're really determined by either this rush to attain the new, so we're always seeking to look at the future. We're always in a rush to, no, we need to work for tomorrow. We don't have the time to kind of stop. Or looking at the past in this kind of nostalgic sense. Oh, what was there, how we look at it, etc. But then, where do we go with now? Like the living moment. And this is where I really arrived at a realization that this concept of the race for the new was that which is something that is really also extrapolated into modernity and infused into a race of accumulation of matter and wealth, and something that is a little foreign to a place like Morocco. And Morocco had something to offer that was very valuable about the ownership of time and looking at time in its presentness. And that is a political act in of itself. So that was a very kind of key concept that I wanted to look into and respect my surroundings based on that. And one very fascinating kind of comment that I received from the participating artists, many that came to Morocco, and I had 47 artists participating from all over Africa and the Middle East. And I would just say that one of them said, "It's so quiet in Morocco. Why is it so quiet?" And I said it's because of all the craftspeople working, doing things with their hands. Because actually Marrakesh, if you go there, it's you'd be amazed at the bustling Medina and the kind of force of all these craftsmen and the sounds, but when you're in the houses that are right there, you just don't listen, you don't hear that bustle. And I really do think that everything in the Medina is made by hand, and we've lost that. I mean, we've lost that kind of idea of what does it mean to live what we make by our hands, without a fetishistic kind of relationship. We're not putting it like Benjamin was talking about, this modern moment where it becomes far removed from the hand and it becomes on a pedestal, and you create that distance relationship and a museology that you don't reference. It's not in your lived environment. And that's where the concept of living also became very kind of key. So I worked with a provocative title that says, "Not new now." And I mean, it's not new. It's everything that we live. And I really started to use the idea of living and replacing this has been done as well for many years, but replacing the word contemporary art with living art in this context in particular, because I really wanted to look at a practice of artists that was very much invested in the idea of living and people and society and politics. So this was a very kind of undercurrent and key thing that I wanted to present. And again, in my kind of investigative way, I wanted to, enter full screen, I wanted to show a practice of artists that, and present artworks in places that are historical, like Bahia Palace, and here I also did an essay format for the exhibition. So I had 5 chapters. I had Bahia Palace, which I called Living Matters. And I had the Badia Palace, where it's a historical 16th century palace. And I called the chapter where I showed the work there, Living Ruins. And you'll see also concept of recycling manifest itself there as well. And the idea of matter and its, I want to say its dissolution, and what is more important, that kind of dichotomy that I'm really keen on. And then the 3rd chapter was called Right and Right, based on an artwork by an artist that dealt with the idea of body, narrative, gender, and what is right and right. And then the 4th and 5th chapters were the same title, and it was called Sight and Sights of Knowledge. And I wanted to play with all these kind of languages. This is the introductory work that you see here, and it's Eric Van Hove, who has an atelier of artisans that work with him, and they've created what you see is an actually functional sculpture, composite sculpture, that makes up the D9T engine of a caterpillar. And this actual engine was unfortunately used in bulldozing an American activist, Rachel Corrie, in Gaza, who was trying to defend a home in Gaza, a Palestinian home, from being razed to the ground. And this caterpillar just walked all over her and killed her instantaneously. And he creates this kind of tribute, and he actually worked with Moroccan artisans and also Indonesian artisans in a combined effort to create this monument and tribute to Rachel. I think the poetic gesture was absolutely remarkable. What you have here is, I had this as a standing image because I just love it. It's Mohammed Melehi. And I'm gonna talk about Meleh in a second, but let me see, I don't know, okay, sorry. Mohammed Melehi is part of a very important school of artists that I presented, took the effort with local curators that I worked with, Salma Lahlu and Fatma Zahra Al-Khrisa, who we worked on presenting the Casablanca School. And for people who know this, and don't know this, Mohammed Melehi was actually an artist who studied here in the US in the late 50s and early 60s, was friends with Rosenquist and other pop artists. And he kind of fell out of the narrative of that art history, interestingly enough, but was a key figure. He knows them, he still does. He still visits them when he comes to the US. And Melehi created these cut out pop abstract paintings that were loaded with political messages. Loaded. So this, for example, is called The Flame. And this was done as a call for the intifada, or the call for an uprising of the Atlantic Ocean from North Africa along to the Atlantic, to represent an uprising that he was signaling for the Palestinian cause. And that was a kind of fascinating moment for me to understand. And he was a writer and critic of a very important magazine called Soufl. He was incarcerated at one point in the 70s, but continued to work quite actively in the social and political, and especially in the artistic field. His paintings were very important, alongside other very important artists like Farid Belkahia and Shab'a. They created what was known as the Casablanca School, because they presented their paintings in Jami' al-Ifna, which is an open square, very important and known in Marrakesh, for a week out in the open. And that's how I showed the works. I decided that these were open rooms, no humid control, no humidity control, no nothing. It actually got shat on by a pigeon. Interestingly enough, we wiped it out. And that's an interesting thing about even the rationale of these artists. And they said in their manifesto, after they did that exhibition, that this was art that is meant for the people. And if it's meant for the people, it's going to be as public displayed as possible. So part of these were the very important kind of ideas. So you're looking at very formal, beautiful paintings, but they're shocking in their political content. Another important kind of reference for me across the Atlantic was looking at a lot of African American artists like Al Loving. Recycling here really took another kind of important reference, Sam Gilliam. And I wanted to look at presenting also on another important thing for me. Forget all the politics, but I wanted to look at beauty. Look how gorgeous a Sam Gilliam work looks, hung from a hand-painted ceiling in a palace in Bahia. The mere formalism of that, the way, and unfortunately I can't show you in this, but the stripes of the red and blue resonated with that ceiling as well in Al Loving's work. And that sheer beauty of kind of coming back into a place that spoke about a different materiality and formality was really essential. This is Oscar Murillo's work, a large body of work that he created, where these are his black paintings where you could touch them. They talked about cotton trade and mold and had a very different set of aesthetics that he was investigating in this large installation. Omar Barrada is another curator I partnered with, and he presented a fantastic exhibition within this exhibition about Ahmed Bou'nani, who's a very important critic and investigator of, let's say, traditional methodologies of crafts in Morocco. And Tariq Atwi, who presented a beautiful sound performance, known for his evocation of the body and how sound from tarab, this idea in Arabic music that is responsive to the bodies of the listeners, starts to present it and looking and investigating traditions of music from Morocco itself. This is the living ruins, the second part. This is the beautiful, I could just show that image and say, I could have shown the palace empty and it would still have resonated with people. But this is the Palais Badia that I said was from the 16th century, and I showed works of El Natsui. This was a commission that he did specifically for Al-Badia. This is the Rashid Quraishi again that you saw at the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi. This kind of longevity of my relationships with artists is something that's very important for me. And I'm, they're my accompanying people. They'll come with me everywhere. This is a performance by Radwan Mriziga. Radhika Kimji with this kind of parachute that's fallen on the walls. Fatih Zamouri with a fa rock, and it's called Sheltered from Nothing. Ahmed Mater, a Saudi artist who's a friend, and he talks about these specifically disposed objects from Mecca that he's reclaimed, and we showed them here in the vaults of Al-Badia. This is Dana Awartani with geometric formations that she's created. talking about, they're called the Platonic solid duels, and she's done them in various shapes with local artisans. She collaborated with Eric van Hove, the artist that I showed at the beginning, with his atelier of artisans. And this idea of collaboration was extremely important. This is Muna Hatoum's work that I also showed in the context of the rooms, but it was fascinating to see it in, as a piece of furniture in a very ornate room. This is Calera Bach again from the Palestinian Museum of Natural History and Humankind, and here, this is in his chapter, Right and Right. In particular, he showed two shoes, and this is a place where I can actually talk about these two shoes of his. They're both right and right. And it's actually his shoe and his ex-lover's shoe. And he puts them together because they used to collect shoes apparently, and after having been together for so many times, they broke up, and their favorite pair of shoe, Khalil asked him to send him the right side. And he created Right and Right because for all these kind of gendered body kind of questions, he just presents right and right together. And this is Right and Right is an early work from the 90s that Khalil had done. And this is him, trying to eat the shoes and in a performance of the work. A this and a that, and that's what he called it in 95. This is Sandy Hilal and Alessandro Petti, a duo from Bethlehem and Italy that have worked on decolonizing architecture. And here again, decolonization was a very important running theme throughout that you see in the works. And this work is particularly about migration and immigration. And this is a treatise that they've created with a group of refugees from a refugee camp in Palestine, and they asked a calligrapher in Morocco to write it in a book, in a sort of manifesto that it has traveled from Morocco to Palermo and other places that face this kind of call of migration. This is Superflex, a Danish group's fabulous film, Kwasa Kwasa, that we showed underground at the Kutubiyya Mosque in Sites and Sites of Knowledge. And it also deals with ideas of migration and particularly repatriation. And this, they talk about, very specific incidents, and it's a very poetic film. Let's see, and that's it for the examples that I have on the work here. Do I have time for? Shall I go with one? Yeah? Questions? Okay. I'm just gonna very quickly, just 2 minutes. I just want to say that on my current work, I'll just leave it go on screen mode. This is Jerusalem Lives, the work that I just did at the Palestinian Museum. And I left New York after 8 years and quit the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi project and decided it was time to go back home to Palestine. And I started, and I was invited to do the inaugural show at the Palestinian Museum called Jerusalem Lives. And this is me going back to a little bit more of my blatant political persona as a curator. And I think we need more of that these days. I was very aware of the logic of Trump. I had left here when the debates were happening, and Trump was saying that he was going to annex Jerusalem to Israel and make it the capital of Israel. And that is something for me that is a calamitous thing, because I think Jerusalem is not just the capital of Palestine, but I think it's problematic to say that it's the capital of the Jewish state only, and Israel aspires to be the Jewish state. And I think that is an issue, because I think of Jerusalem as a place for I want to say a global place, or for everyone, and that's the concept I started to work on. I thought, and in particular, this project was a very hard thing for me to work in, because I'm not capable. I can't visit Jerusalem. I need an Israeli military permit to access Jerusalem, which is, by the way, 20 minutes away from me by car, and I can't go. And I was smuggled only once throughout the time I was doing this exhibition in February. And when I went there, I realized how much of a dead city it was. And that for me was another kind of slap in the face that this city of the imagination, I want to call it, is somewhere that is absolutely a cemetery of life. Where's the living? Where's the aspiration for all of that in a place like Jerusalem? So I took all these kind of experiences and I kind of ran with it, and I created an idea that I looked at. I went on a tangent and decided that globalization started in Jerusalem and basically died in Jerusalem. And this is the kind of malady of contemporary cities that we experience everywhere. So if you want to understand London's Brexit craze, or why, here in the US you want to build a wall in Mexico, you have to look at the logic of what is being applied in a city like Jerusalem to fully comprehend how these things, you want to understand why a person like me takes 5 months to receive a visa to arrive here at the Menil and deliver a lecture. It's because of this kind of logic, this closed door policy, security, enhanced ideas, weaponry, warmongering. I think this is all part of that logic. And there is, unfortunately, an undercurrent of colonialism that feeds into that logic, and a rush for an accumulation of wealth, everything that I perfectly stand against. And for this show, I did 4 parts, an exhibition of 4 parts. The central exhibition that we flipped through here, this is the ending of it, was looking at this idea of globalization and studying it from aspects of culture, economy, politics, and ideology, and then ending with culture. And then the second part, which we're going to see right here and moving forward, was creating commissions in the gardens, because that dense audio-visual exhibition I created earlier was a little too much. It became like a labyrinth of a lot of information. But I'm also speaking to an audience that cannot access Jerusalem like myself. So I'm aware of youth, of a big kind of group of people that can't go to Jerusalem and need to learn about these issues. Need to learn that, for example, the economy of the city is being stifled through another flourishing economy of Israel, because they're creating a military-industrial complex applied on the city and selling weaponry for $6.5 billion everywhere, and relying on building walls as prototypes and selling these walls off, and creating a culture of security and enhancement. They just applied, for example, security towers all across Damascus Gate, which is a historical, beautiful site, and now it's marred with these towers on 3 ends. So I did not want that to be the sole thing I did, because in the end, I'm anchored to artists. I dream about artists. They haunt me. I love the kind of messages of openness and dreams and aspirations. And again, I'm not someone confined to the white space. So I created the exhibition. Let's just go back here, where you see the works of commissions of 18 artists that I worked with that are Palestinian, Arab, and some of them recurring names. By now you'll have noticed that we did them in the beautiful gardens of the museum, because they have a small space that is the central part, but then there's a lot of the gardens that we were able to use for the commissions. So Calera Bach created these monumental sculptures, 67%. This is Bob Gramsma. He created a 150-ton piece that people could kind of interact with. This is Adrian Villaroja with the ramps and the kind of legs of David chopped up here. This work is Allahumma, it says, God bless this earth, whether it's holy or not, by Inas Yassin. Rawan Abu Rahmeh. This is Khalid Hurani with a piece that you see. Sorry, I'm just going to go back. This is going really quickly. So this is, oh, sorry, the wrong way. Sorry. This is what you see on the ceramic piece there. It reads a compass that leads to Jerusalem it essentially says it's faulty, but here he left it open, a compass that does not lead to Jerusalem. And it was actually applied, a ceramic piece that was applied on the house of a family of a martyr in Jerusalem. This piece of Imam Isa actually didn't make it. The Israelis withheld it for 2 months and then sent it back after making us even pay customs for having it being held in their airport for 2 months. So Adhar Jabir, stone opus, he was really questioning this idea that that Jerusalem was made out of stone. Everything in Jerusalem is made out of stone, and he wanted to create an interactive sculptural piece that made people want to become one with the stone. And I thought that was very suitable for a place like Palestine, and we ended with that piece called Key of Return by Sudarshan Shetty. I hope this gave you a large preview of some of the major projects that I've worked on in the past 10 years, and I would be happy to receive any questions if you have any of them. Thank you.
Go on. Mic here. I have a mic here if anybody has a question.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Can you talk about
Tell me.
collection building as a form of activism
Mm.
and how you approach that at the Guggenheim? And I don't know much about the new Palestinian Museum, but is that also part of their project, or how you see that being
Yeah.
part of your future work, maybe even being
Yeah.
independent?
Yeah. That's a very pointed question. To answer you on the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, I would say that project, or just having been affiliated with the Guggenheim and working with them for a long time, I think it's not activism. And I have to say, I have a little bit of like an allergy from the word activism, because why? And the reason why I have an allergy from the word activism is I feel activism really talks about certain actions that are immediate and have a tactic that they use kind of like from demonstrations, etc., that rely on a beginning and an end, or they rely on shock culture, and that's a lot of the things that I do not subscribe to. What I really hold, and I don't mean it that I think that the work is not essential for activists. I think it's extremely important and it's pointed, but it's not what I would want to do. I'm an art historian. I'm someone who's invested in conversation. I'm invested in dialoguing and talking and changing, and I believe in change. I don't care what other people say, that change can't happen. It can. And I invested in doing that in an institution like the Guggenheim and the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, and I saw change. I saw change with colleagues. Education is a key thing here, talking to people and talking to colleagues, slowly changing the mindsets, representing artists, talking about these artists, bringing them in, for many, many times when they dismissed me, for 100 times, and then guess what? At 101, bang, it resonated. So it's a challenge. It certainly is a challenge, but it's not activism. It's certainly not activism. I would say it's more profound than that, because it's historically changing the fabric of institutions by its key people. By educating its key people. And then when you build a collection, and this is something that I really stand to support fully, is when you create a material witness of time that is unchangeable. And we've worked with collections and we know the potency of these collections, because they become a marked point in time, even if the building was never there. But that's a pointed moment where these works are there and they exist and they hold that kind of weight and value to them. As for the Palestinian Museum, it's actually not collecting. It's not, as of now, it has not collected. There's been a lot of requests to donate collections or let the Palestinian Museum house these collections. Personally, I've advised them not to as an independent curator, and I think they're taking that advice, and it's something that they are really seeking to do, is not collect. And I would hope that the Palestinian Museum really becomes much more about civic engagement and a place to understand that the role of a museum can go beyond just museology and really building up a vision and a discourse for the country. And that's something that is quite essential. It has a big political role to take in, especially that now with everything that's happening, there's a big abyss. Like, we don't know what the roadmap for Palestine is. There's a loss. And I think that kind of civic leadership is essential with an institution like the Palestinian Museum. Well, they were, I mean, this exhibition was actually, it was well received in Palestine itself. Of course, it's controversial on a global scale. It's not something that, for example, would travel easily. I've certainly tried. The part with the work of the artist was, appealing to a lot of institutions, but certainly not one with the audiovisuals, with a lot of didactics about the politics of and the nature in Palestine. But I think we, ultimately we're able to push through, and I think as a curator, I cannot compromise the messages that I think are important of its time. I mean, while I was doing this show, there was an uprising that occurred in Jerusalem because they barred people from being able to access Al-Aqsa Mosque in August, early August, just exactly 3 weeks before we opened this show. And there was a civil uprising that happened, nonviolent, and it was all Muslims, Christians, everyone, Buddhists, atheists, and a lot of people were making jokes that there are a lot of people that were stoned to death were also part of the demonstration. And they were all in these sit-ins praying. So they would take on just as if they're in the Muslim prayer, like praying onto the ground, or praying like to God with beads, like if you're a Christian or anything. And therefore the soldiers weren't able to remove them because, it would be quite aggressive if you're kind of assaulting someone who's in prayer. And that was I thought that was such a creative moment of being able to harness let's say, the act of protest, but in a creative manner. And that was happening simultaneously to the exhibition. And we actually put, I think I have one image, and here we go. One image that, here in the ideology, this is part of the sit-ins that were occurring and the protests. This was when it was announced that they were actually going to remove the metal detectors from the entrance to Al-Aqsa and remove the new smart cameras that they were attaching onto the wall. So, and that was a success in of itself. And I thought that was exactly that if there was a message that was needed, that was it. Like that there was force in the creative act and in means of resistance, culturally speaking, that can also infuse the politics of that place. So, and I think that's something that in a place like Palestine, where our movement is curtailed, where there's not a lot of hope, we need that on every level. And I think it's a responsibility for institutions like museums, like the Palestinian Museum, to provide that.
One of the tasks of the Guggenheim Commission was really thinking about how to make an institution based on a model that's from a very different place, in a very different context, and a very different way of thinking about history and greatness.
Yeah. Yeah.
How you fit within a certain kind of narrative. But at the same time, I think in your curatorial practice, creative practice, intellectual practice, you value, you've talked about hope, but you've also talked about dreams, you've talked about intuition, bodily knowledge, different forms of or different sites of knowledge. And I would think you speak a little bit about that, about
Yeah, I mean, I've constantly been, unapologetic about the fact that there is a stream of what informs me as a curator / artist that is part of the unexplained, part of the illogical, part of the phenomenological, part of my response to matter, my dreams about artists. For example, I remember meeting with Oscar Murillo in London after his David Zwirner show, and after there was this big fuss about collectors and him being hyped up in the market. And I met this, young kid. He's 25, 26 at the time, and I saw the work, and the work was, remarkable to me. And I went to Marrakesh, and I was like, I don't want to invite someone who's a David Zwirner artist into Marrakesh, honestly. Like, I'm happy to do this show without that kind of bulk of, the economy, the market. I don't need that in Marrakesh. I'm talking about decolonization. I'm talking about aspirations of people. I do not need that kind of, marring effect. And I could not stop dreaming about Oscar. Not a moment. Like, every day in the morning, I thought about Oscar. Night, I thought about Oscar. He just haunted me. And boom, I was like, I called my assistant, and I was like, Ilaria, I think Oscar is in New York. Ilaria, talk to Oscar. Invite Oscar. We need Oscar in the show. And 2 days later, he was in Marrakesh with his backpack, and he's like, I'm here, I'm ready. I want to work, I want to do things. And I met a person who's the most generous human being and most giving, and he's been with me on several projects for now. And I've seen him work, and I found out that his girlfriend is also an artist who's Malaysian Palestinian from Gaza, and our worlds kind of collided, and it's been a friendship in a different kind of way. And it's taken me, and Oscar actually participated in Jerusalem Lives. I invited him, where he's created a long-term project, which is part of Jerusalem Lives, where we partnered with institutions, because I didn't want to do the film screening or the event or the performance. I wanted these long-term projects with institutions, and he partnered with Silwan Club. And he's creating what he calls the Institute of Reconciliation, where he provides mentorship and workshops for young people to help him produce these black paintings, the series that he's been producing. And he's helping kind of create an ecology of labor in the world, and especially in the global south. And this is something that he's hoping to keep on doing in Jerusalem for a long period of time. And he's taken it upon himself, and with his family members, and they've come and they've sorted themselves out in East Jerusalem and helped develop this project. So yes, intuition, dreams, fostering relationships, friendships. I think that's all part of the fabric of what makes me who I am, and that is an added thing to it's the marriage of who I am also as a person who's learned a lot from American culture, but I also have something to give back, which is part of my culture that is, it's heavily steeped in values that are about society, about who we are as people, about living. And that's something that I feel I need to give back as well in my practice, in my museum logic, and all of that. Any more questions? Thank you. Thank you all.